Hi, I'm James Brookes, and welcome to From the Factory Floor, a conversational podcast about all things startup and tech, brought to you by the folks at Thestartupfactory.tech.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of From the Factory Floor. I've left my co-host sniffing into a tissue today because he's not feeling too well, and I didn't think that it would make for the best podcast experience. So I'm joined today by Ian, and it's just the two of us. Hi Ian, how are you?
Yeah, not bad, Nyree. Yeah, I'm fit and healthy to go. So no sniffing or coughing on this one.
And nobody wants to hear that, do they, on a podcast? Feel like I've taken it for all the listeners today and said to James, like, it's just a no today. Come back next week without
When he's better,
without your ailments. But yeah, we don't need to hear anything. So we're going to talk about something today that we're going to talk about a lot this year, and I think any founder that's kind of got the ear of what's happening in the marketplace is going to be thinking about it, but it's not talked about often enough, and that is bootstrapping. So Ian, I know it's a topic you are hugely passionate about. It's something that more founders need to consider, and more founders are going to have to consider. And as we go in today talking about bootstrapping, I wondered, in the truest sense of the word, if you could just kind of kick us off with what that actually means.
Yeah, thanks, Nyree. I think it is really important because everyone has got hung up on this mantra of raising money, and we know 2023 was really tough, and there's no reason to suggest it'll be any easier this year. Equally, a number of founders that have kind of got a KPI as raising money just kind of is bonkers to me. Um, you set off with this passion and fire in your belly to do something, and all bootstrapping is, it's kind of a minimalistic approach. But what it is, it's simple and it's a process, and it's about building something for yourself. It's about investing in yourself by yourself, growing using limited resources. And that's the real driver of entrepreneurship to me, because really the metric that an early stage founder should look at is chasing customers, not chasing investors. And I think if you look at the word itself and kind of where it comes from, it's that reference back to the 19th century, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, getting on with it, doing it, and not kind of looking for kind of support. So for me, it's about focusing your entrepreneurial endeavors on your passion and your ideas. Ditch this hustle mentality and go out there and do it for yourself.
Yeah, and generating your own revenue and reinvesting that back into the business. And like you said before, obviously we haven't seen anything to suggest that the funding landscape is going to change for startups. So we're going to find many that are going to have to bootstrap by hook or by crook. And those that haven't kind of considered it and haven't tooled up and skilled up are potentially going to find themselves falling short of where they need to do. So what would you say, Ian? You've worked with a lot of startups and founders that have bootstrapped, and we do have a kind of bootstrap first mentality at TSF. What are the key qualities that a bootstrapping founder needs to possess?
Well, I think it's mindset, and the phrase I'd use is what you're building isn't your minimum viable product; it's your minimum viable startup. So it's actually putting a combination of common sense, determination, ingenuity into your passion, but getting out of the building and proving that there is something out there. So resilience is talked a lot, but I think common sense and being smart. And this minimum viable startup, what you're seeking to do is not build the product, but just prove that there is a business opportunity out there. So having a survival threshold, having the right mentality, I think knowing how to balance your time is important. Working on the priorities. I think controlling your emotions is also important. So there's lots of things around the mindset which kind of are focused on what you need to do to prove there's a business opportunity. But as I said in the intro, the bootstrapping mentality for me is about investing in yourself, and therefore you have to balancing your time, controlling your emotions are really important, and not getting a victim mentality. Being absolutely resolute that bootstrapping is an embryonic process, and it's about learning, it's about testing, it's a figuring out what resonates in your market. So that will to win is important, but actually being reflective as well. Laying the groundwork is what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, what we're not saying is bootstrapping means that you spend nothing. So the reality of running a business is there's cash coming in and cash going out. Where are some of I suppose let's start with some of the common misconceptions that founders very early on think that they need to spend money on or buy in resource, that we sort of counter challenge that and suggest that they need to do it themselves. So in terms of kind of preserving cash,
Yeah.
where do founders kind of spend money where they perhaps don't need to early on?
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point rather than where should you be spending money. So I think you've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to do it for yourself. It is a DIY approach. So what you don't need to buy in is sales and marketing initially. I think that has to be founder led. You're looking to actually create awareness, educate the market. Um, Time is your most valuable commodity. So investing the time, meeting the right people. So you don't need expensive sales pit hire to start off with. You've got to do the selling yourself. People will buy from you. Equally, I'm not a fan of um, getting office space too early. I think it's nice to work in a community of other startups. There's emotional support, there's networking support, but I think in terms of kind of spending money on office space to start off with, or I've got a desk in a startup incubator, make that aspirational. Set yourself some targets, but again, day one, I don't think you need to be doing that. And certainly the sales and marketing, there's a lot of stuff, you should be just absolutely on the money yourself. Maybe working with someone like yourself to get some early pointers as to what that looks like, but generating your own content, working hard on LinkedIn, going to events, that doesn't cost money. And it has to be founder led marketing, founder led sales.
Yeah. I think the other thing I always say is you don't need to invest in a brand early on, because your brand is going to pivot, your business is going to pivot. That's the reality of early stage startups. So if you go and invest, and people think that that's the traditional linear process, and probably in the textbooks that's what it will tell you, that you create the brand and you invest in that and you trademark it and register it, etc., and you've got this color palette, but it's irrelevant. You've got tools now like Canva that allow you to do a lot of that yourself, but it's absolutely, you may as well set fire to £10,000 if you're going to use
Yeah,
it.
there's a slightly manic quality as well, which probably suits my personality. But I think you've got to do it for yourself. You've got to prove to yourself that it is slightly solitary. But have you got that independent spirit of being an entrepreneur, working on yourself, for yourself, by yourself, proving to yourself that your hunch, your idea, your hypothesis, there's something out there. You've got to touch and breathe the market yourself and interpret that and use that whole bootstrapping experience to test. And I think when you then seek to take your business into the next stage in whatever form that is, talking to people, either people you'll hire or those early stage investors with angels, they'll recognise you've put the hard yards in. So I think you earn the right then for investment, rather than rocking up saying, "Look, I've got the best idea ever." You've proved that you're passion, you've proved you put the hard yards in, and it may be 6 to 12 months, Nyree. You've proved it, but I think you then earn the right. And that's when you start to think around, right, how do we get to the next stage? So the only thing you should be spending money on early stage is getting in front of customers, going to events, stuff like that, making sure you've got an expense budget for travel, because it's important you get out of your own network as well. If you're based in Manchester, get across to Liverpool, get across to Leeds, get across to Sheffield, get out of that little space where it can be a bit of a comfort zone, and you've got to really push yourself to go to events at 5 o'clock in the evening at Leeds to
Yeah.
kind of prove to yourself you've got the appetite.
Yeah, I think the other thing actually that I would say is training courses or courses. So looking at where your skills
Mm,
lie or what. So we founders tend to either, in my experience, they either have a strong kind of commercial background but not technical, or they have a strong technical background, which means they lack the
that's a
creativity
good
and
point. Good point.
the sales and the networking. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to find some courses. Doing a course around sales, a course on Canva. They're low cost, but actually the thing is, if it's your business, you've got to know that, once you've built up a team, if that person walks away in your team, which does happen, you can fall back, you can do that yourself. Actually, you don't want to be left without a paddle. And you
Mm.
can't do any of this stuff yourself. So, even when I work with early stage founders, it's very much around guidance and giving them the confidence and the support to do things themselves, but it's not doing it for them because they have to learn how to do it. So, and equally on the technical side, I think if you are a commercial founder, spending time and money understanding the technical landscape, you don't need to
Yeah.
come train and become a developer, is actually really useful. However, I would also caveat that to say there are loads of free courses and resources out there
Mm.
as well. So I know HubSpot have a lot of courses that I think it's like the HubSpot University where you can learn a lot. Obviously, Canva, there's loads of tools, YouTube tutorials, frameworks, and methodology. So, like you say, it's about using your time wisely rather than spending cash.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I think there's a lot of free stuff out there. Plug into that. I do think having some face-to-face support with subject matter experts to kind of just
Yeah,
kind of keep you pointing in the right direction, um, I think is also useful. And TSF, we try to be helpful, offer free advice, a bit of guidance, like yourself, just kind of help them shape the thinking where it's not something you've had exposure to. Um, so yeah, I think but it is a minimalistic approach, and I think you've got to learn because ultimately, are you going to be the person that runs this business? You certainly are the person for the first 12 to 18 months, in my view, that is the kind of leading the business in terms of market awareness and creating those customer connections. People buy from people. It's a bit of an old-fashioned saying, but I think it certainly as a startup founder, you're sat in front of a prospect. Your passion, your commitment, and your ideas and your knowledge is what will create the connection for a pilot or those early sales. But yeah, knowing the tricks of the trade around marketing and tech and a bit of cash flow management never goes amiss.
yeah. And I think then I suppose what it comes on to is invariably you do spend, you do need to spend money. We've talked about where that might need to be spent, but understanding the ROI and what you're going to get back from that. And,
Yeah.
a lot of things early days is test and learn. But, what's your view in terms of establishing some kind of KPIs and ROI around spend early on?
Yeah. I think you do need to set a budget. I think people set off with a dream and a vision, which gives them the motivation to do it. But equally, you have to have a commercial framework around that. So setting a time and a cost budget of I'm going to do this for the next 3 months, the next 3 months, the next 3 months. I don't think it's unreasonable to bootstrap for between 6 to 12 months,
Mm.
because there needs to be periods of reflection as well as periods of quite intense activity. So you need a plan around that in terms of how you're going to spend your time, what's the activity, and can you afford it? What is your personal budget? So I'd say someone who's thinking of starting on this journey needs to probably have in their mind 12 months and say a 10K budget. And obviously within that, there's the opportunity cost of the time that they're not kind of getting a salary for. So, but I think that framework around some metrics in terms of what I'm going to spend, but what are the outcomes and the KPIs? And it's kind of, that managing yourself and being honest with yourself. For me, it's all about customer facing activity. How many events, how many customer meetings, how many conversations have I had? almost kind of mirroring what the sales funnel would ultimately look like. But in those early days, the ROI of your effort and your time are key, but also what are you spending? So, looking at events, traveling to events, investing in some marketing. And the other thing which is also important is kind of within those milestones, a phrase I'd use is pivot to be thrifty. Um, as a successful bootstrappers are master pivoters. They learn how to shift gears, change direction, change their path. If things isn't working, things aren't working, how do they get around them? Or is there feedback saying actually there isn't really the demand there? And that's the balance really, I think, of being resilient and having that mindset on survival. But you're right, you need some KPIs around number of meetings, how you're kind of spending that budget. Um, don't make yourself miserable. Don't look over your shoulder at other people raising money. But yeah, you've got to be positive. You've got to be a bit of a Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah.
What is going to work in the near term, and be mindful of thinking that through.
Yeah. I think on the flip side of that, my suggestion would be if you're bootstrapping, I would avoid interacting or looking at anybody that's raising money because you're comparing apples and pears.
Yeah.
I know we're making a conscious decision not to talk too much about investment because it's not particularly helpful for startups, and we're focusing on what is going to help them. However, I think the two things that I would say is our interactions with the investors that we work with in Manchester have all said one thing around bootstrap, which is bootstrap as long as possible.
Yeah.
It would be a massive red flag, I think, in terms of the founder mentality. If they said, we're bootstrapped, we could continue doing it, but we're going to raise investment instead, because that should never be your first option. And they're always big advocates of investment and bootstrapping. And secondly, I think to compare yourself with a founder that's just raised, you're only seeing what people want to share on LinkedIn. And actually, I always remember talking to a founder, and actually, she did have VC money, and they didn't survive. The business didn't survive. They didn't get any further funding, and that isn't a slant on them at all. They were amazing. But she said to me, actually, I wish we didn't have that VC money, because when we bootstrapped, she said, I looked after every pound because it was mine. When we had the funding, we were much more frivolous about how we'd spend it. We're way the paid budget, and you've got pressures from investors then. What are you going to do to turbocharge this activity? And she said, I wouldn't have done any of that if it had been my money. I'd have been much more cautious around it. And I think, it is your money, and you want to make sure, in I suppose the way that you look after your money in your personal life, hopefully.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I've never sort of forgotten that. I thought actually it's like really interesting. Everyone glamorises investment, but actually she felt that was potentially the downfall for the business.
There is some interesting research, that kind of, and again, it depends what the nature of your business is. But for me, it's about the founder mindset and kind of using that bootstrapping to kind of test your idea. The research shows that just because you raise money doesn't mean you're going to be more successful than bootstrap. All raising money does in those very early days, Nyree, is help you go a bit faster. And is that a good thing? Do you know enough about the market? Do you know what your customers look like, why they're buying, why they would buy for you? So an investment of time in yourself, I think, is preferable, because also, you take the more dilution early on as well.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's a philosophical thing, but I think the mentality is, if you want to do a startup, bootstrapping is the best place to start. Because you prove to yourself, you prove a market, and you will then prove to future investors. And if you've kind of got all that market testing and that market knowledge and proof points, that adds value to your first raise anyway. But chase customers, don't chase investors is definitely my mantra.
Bro, I think that feels like a perfect phrase to end on, and it's certainly something that we say over and over again with startups that come through the door here. So hopefully for anyone listening, it gives you a really good understanding and a bit of a framework to look at how to bootstrap. If you have got any questions, obviously do get in touch with us at TSF. I think we're probably the kings and queens of bootstrapping in Manchester and doing things on a budget. But actually, it's always been successful, hasn't it? So we've got lots of kind of hints and tricks and tips and lots coming up over the next few weeks where we speak to different founders who have bootstrapped and different ways of doing it. I think the one thing we want people to understand is, there's more people out there doing it than you think. And we'll hopefully be able to share some more of those stories and, delve deeper into how to manage cash flow, etc. So that was really useful, Ian. Thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you'll be back in a couple of weeks with James. He'll be fighting fit.
Good. No, thanks, Nyree. I think it is important that we know doing a startup is tough, but for me, it is the right approach. Just in terms of feet on the ground, boots on the ground, do it for yourself.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody, and stay tuned. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I think that just about wraps things up here. If you have any thoughts or questions on anything we said today, get in touch, whether that be through our Twitter @RealTSF or email at hello@StartupFactory.tech, or feel free to drop in for a coffee and a chat. As ever, thanks for listening.